She thought she was just a nameless waitress refilling his glass, until the gun swung toward his chest, and she stepped in front of it, forcing the most feared man in the city to choose between his empire and her life. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe. Rain hammered softly against the tall front windows of Riva's, turning the city lights outside into blurred streaks of gold and red as Mia wiped down the polished marble counter for the third time that evening. Tuesday nights were always slow, but tonight the stillness felt heavier, like the whole place was holding its breath. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was just her own exhaustion bleeding into the atmosphere. 10 hours on her feet, 2 double espressos, 1 skipped lunch, and she still felt like she was moving underwater. The restaurant was dim, romantic even, with candles flickering on every linen-draped table and quiet jazz drifting through hidden speakers. Normally, the place buzzed with upper-class chatter, clinking cutlery, and pretentious laughter. Tonight, it was nearly empty. Just 2 older couples lingering over wine, a businessman typing frantically on his laptop, and 1 man seated in Mia's section. The man who had become something of a mystery around here. Luca Romano. The name alone made the other servers tense up. Not visibly, not enough for the manager to notice, but in the subtle ways Mia had learned to read over the years. The way Aaron pretended to be busy polishing forks whenever he walked in. The way Mario, who'd spent 20 years working in restaurants without being scared of anything or anyone, suddenly avoided eye contact whenever Luca requested water refills. Even the kitchen staff went quiet when one of his orders came through, as if seasoning his pasta incorrectly might summon something terrible. But tonight, as Mia watched him from behind the counter, she didn't see the monster her coworkers whispered about. She just saw a man who looked tired. Not physically. He carried himself with too much quiet control for that. But something in his eyes suggested a different kind of exhaustion. The kind that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too many heavy things at once. He sat alone at his usual table in the corner, a place where he could see the entire restaurant without ever being seen unless he allowed it. Dark suit, dark tie, dark gaze. Yet his expression wasn't cold. It was unreadable. He looked like someone who didn't have the luxury of letting his guard down, even in a place where the candlelight softened everyone else into something gentle. Mia grabbed a pitcher of water and crossed the room. Her sneakers were silent on the carpeted floor, her steps light despite how badly her feet ached. She didn't mind his table. In fact, she preferred it. He never made demands, never complained, never flirted, never looked her up and down the way too many men did when they thought the uniform meant permission. He just existed, calmly, quietly, as if he was more aware of her exhaustion than he should be, and choosing not to add to it. She approached his table with her usual polite smile. "More water?" she asked softly. His eyes lifted to hers, and the impact of his attention hit her like stepping into warm light from a cold street. There was something incredibly focused about the way he looked at people, as if he wasn't seeing their clothes or their posture, but something underneath. But he didn't stare at her like he stared at everyone else. No, when he looked at her, it was softer, curious almost. "Please," he said, his voice low, rich, and smooth, in a way that made her spine straighten. As she poured the water, she noticed the slightest tension in his jaw, a small, controlled flicker, gone as soon as it came. Most people wouldn't have caught it, but Mia wasn't most people. Years of surviving on tips and reading customers' moods for survival had sharpened her instincts. Something was bothering him. Something deeper than an undercooked steak or a long day. "Slow night," Luca murmured, glancing around. "Rain keeps people home," she replied. "Or maybe the city finally ran out of people who can afford $38 pasta." A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Not quite a laugh, not quite approval, but it lit something in his eyes, something faint and almost humanizing. "You look tired," he said, not judgmental, just observant. She nearly dropped the water pitcher. "That obvious?" He shook his head once. "Not obvious, just noticeable." His gaze dipped briefly to the faint shadows beneath her eyes before returning to her face. "Long shift?" "Double," she admitted. "Rent week." He didn't pity her. Didn't give her that tight, awkward smile people used when they didn't know what to say. He simply nodded, as though her exhaustion made perfect sense. "Make sure you get home safely," he said quietly. Something about the way he said it made her heart thump harder than it should have. There was no flirting in his tone, just a quiet command, a promise almost, as if he cared, a little, in a way he wouldn't admit. Mia stepped back from the table, offering him a small, tired smile. "I always do." But as she walked away, she felt his gaze trailing after her. Not predatory, not possessive, just watchful. And for the first time all evening, she didn't feel quite as alone in the quiet, rainy restaurant. No one said it out loud. They didn't have to. The second Luca Romano walked through the door, the entire rhythm of the restaurant shifted. Conversations dimmed. Jokes died halfway out of people's mouths. Even the manager straightened his tie and stood a little taller, as if good posture could save him from whatever storm Luca carried behind those unreadable eyes. By the time he settled into his usual corner seat, every server in the room suddenly had a reason to be anywhere else. Aaron," Mia called across the prep station. "Table 16 is yours, right?" Aaron didn't even look up as she pretended to sort receipts. "I'm, in the middle of something." "You're alphabetizing credit card slips," Mia said. "Exactly. Very important. Time sensitive." Mario, polishing glasses beside her, jumped in. "Mia, Kara, you take him. You're good with difficult personalities." She snorted. "You mean breathing humans?" Mario gave her a look, half pleading, half terrified. He once sent back a dish because the basil was too symmetrical. Too symmetrical. What does that even mean? Mia shook her head, tying her apron tighter. "Relax, he's not that bad." But she understood their fear. Even without trying, Luca intimidated people. Not with anger. Mia had never seen him raise his voice, but with quiet, unshakable authority. Like he could snap his fingers and make a person disappear, but wouldn't waste the energy unless they truly deserved it. Still, she wasn't afraid of him. Maybe she should have been. Maybe she would be someday. But right now, all she saw was a man drowning in exhaustion and solitude. She picked up his menu, though he never needed it, and approached his table. His eyes lifted before she even reached him, as if he could sense her by the shift in the air. A pulse of awareness passed between them, faint but undeniable. "You again," he said, and the corner of his mouth curved. Not quite a smile, more like the thought of one. "You say that like you're disappointed." "On the contrary." His voice was velvet over steel. "You are the only one here who doesn't tremble when I ask for more bread." "Bread's not scary." "You'd be surprised." His gaze drifted briefly to Aaron, who promptly pretended to choke on her espresso. Mia tried not to laugh as she pulled out her little notepad, not because she needed it, but because it gave her something to hold on to. "The usual tonight?" He tilted his head slightly. "You remember?" "I remember everyone's orders." "I don't believe that," he said softly, "but I appreciate the lie." A warm flush crept up her neck. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way his voice dipped lower. Maybe it was the way his eyes softened for half a second before shuddering again. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You look tired." His gaze sharpened. "Do I?" "Yeah, like you haven't slept in 2 or 3 years." A breath of laughter escaped him, quiet, almost disbelieving. "You're observant." "It's part of the job." "And the bruises under your eyes?" he asked gently. "Part of the job as well?" Her breath caught. She hadn't realized they were noticeable beneath her concealer. "Double shifts," she admitted. "Nursing school bills don't pay themselves." He studied her, not pitying, not probing, just seeing her in a way that made her stomach flutter. "I hope you know," he said quietly, "that exhaustion doesn't take away from you." His eyes held hers, unblinking. Not even a little. She had no idea what to say to that. Compliments weren't unusual in her line of work, but this wasn't a line. Not a performance. It was something else, something that made her pulse skitter. "I'll put your order in," she managed, turning away before her face could betray her. The rest of the night passed in a strange, almost fragile rhythm. She brought him wine. He thanked her without the clipped politeness he gave everyone else. She refilled his water. His eyes followed her as she moved across the room. Every time she approached, the tension in his shoulders eased just a fraction. When he finished dinner, he slid the check toward her. She glanced at the receipt and nearly choked. "Luca, this is triple the bill." He lifted a brow. "Is it? Why would you tip this much?" "Because you deserve it more than the people who fear me." Her throat tightened. "You don't have to do that." "I know." His voice softened again, dangerously so. "But I wanted to." She tucked the check into her apron, pulse hammering. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, his hand brushed her wrist, an accidental touch, light as a whisper, but enough to stop her mid-step. His eyes were darker now, more serious. "Be careful going home, Tesoro." The endearment slipped from him like it belonged there, like he hadn't even thought twice before gifting her that soft Italian word that meant treasure. Darling, adored one. Mia swallowed hard. "I will." But long after she clocked out, long after the rain stopped and the city quieted, that single word pulsed in her mind. Tesoro. And the way he'd said it, gentle, protective, almost possessive, felt like the beginning of something she wasn't sure she was ready for. But she wanted anyway. Rain had cleared days ago, but the uneasy tension it brought seemed to linger in Mia's bones. The restaurant was busier tonight. White noise of clinking cutlery, murmured conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter filling the air. Yet beneath it all, something felt off, like a pressure drop before a storm. Mia couldn't explain it, not even to herself. She had gotten good at reading people, tables, moods, atmospheres, but this was different. This felt like the walls themselves were bracing for impact. Luca wasn't in yet, but she knew he would be. He always came on Thursdays, same seat, same quiet rituals, same heavy awareness of the world around him. She wasn't counting down the minutes, but she couldn't deny the flutter in her stomach either. Something about him lingered, even when he wasn't physically present. She had just delivered a round of drinks to a large party and headed toward the back hallway to grab more menus. The extras were kept in a dark alcove near the private dining room, a space usually reserved for high-profile guests or events. Tonight it was supposedly empty. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the tile as she approached the narrow corridor. The noise of the restaurant faded behind her, replaced by a heavier silence. The kind that made her steps slow on instinct. She should have kept walking. She should have minded her business. But her hand froze on the menu cabinet when she heard voices drifting from the private dining room. Not the clatter of trays or the idle gossip of servers, but low, calculated whispers. The kind people used when they didn't want to be heard. "He comes in around 9, like clockwork." Mia's breath caught in her throat. Another voice replied deeper, colder. "Then we only get one chance. You heard the boss. Romano dies tonight." Her heart lurched so violently she nearly dropped the stack of menus. A chill crawled across her skin, icy and immediate. Every instinct screamed for her to run, but her feet refused to move. She leaned closer just enough to see through the thin sliver where the door hadn't fully clicked shut. 2 men sat inside, both unfamiliar. One heavy-set with a thick neck and a shaved head. The other wiry, tattooed fingers drumming on the table in an impatient rhythm. Tattooed fingers spoke first. "We do it here, nice and simple. Quick in, quick out." "Simple?" the big one scoffed. "It's Romano. Nothing about killing a man like him is simple." Tattooed fingers rolled his eyes. "Which is why we're supposed to make it look like a robbery. Boss doesn't want blowback for this." Mia's stomach twisted. "They want it clean," the man continued. "We grab his wallet, maybe 1 or 2 watches from the other tables, rough up the hostess, whatever. Make it look messy." "And if anyone gets in the way?" the big one asked. "Nein!" The answer came back immediately without a flicker of hesitation. "Drop them!" Mia's blood turned to ice. Drop them, not scare them, not tie them up. Kill them. She slapped a hand over her mouth to contain the gasp rising in her throat. Suddenly, the hallway felt smaller, suffocating. The walls pushed closer. Her heart hammered so loudly, she was sure they could hear it. She wasn't supposed to hear this. She wasn't supposed to be here at all. But she had heard it, and now there was no undoing it. Her mind raced. She could go to the manager. But what was he going to do? Call the cops? Luca would be dead before they arrived. And if she told the wrong person? God, what if they were in on it? What if the restaurant wasn't safe at all? A floorboard creaked under her shoe. Mia froze. Both men inside went silent. "Did you hear that?" the big one murmured. Tattooed fingers stood abruptly. "Someone's out there." Panic clawed at her throat. She backed away slowly, praying her footsteps didn't echo. She needed to get out of the hallway. She needed to disappear. She needed... A shadow passed the dining room door. They were coming. Menus half forgotten in her shaking hands, Mia spun and hurried toward the main dining room, keeping her head down, trying to look normal, trying to breathe, trying not to collapse under the weight of what she had heard. The moment she stepped back into the warm glow of chandeliers and chatter, she nearly sobbed with relief. The restaurant noise washed over her like a blanket, drowning out the pounding of her heart. Her eyes swept the room, and then froze. Luca had arrived. He stood near the entrance, handing off his coat, dark eyes scanning the room in one slow, lethal sweep. Her chest tightened. They were going to kill him. Tonight. Here. And he didn't even know he was walking straight into it. Her pulse thrashed wildly as he made his way to his usual table, completely unaware of the danger lurking only a hallway away. Without thinking, without breathing, Mia moved. Toward him. Toward the man everyone feared. Toward the man whose death had been ordered. She didn't know what she was going to say. She didn't know how much danger she was about to pull onto herself. All she knew was simple and terrifying. She had to warn him, before someone else made sure she never spoke again. Her manager's voice echoed in her head as if he were standing right behind her. "Don't get involved, Mia. Ever. Not with men like him. Not with anything that smells like trouble. You want to survive in this city? Keep your head down and your mouth shut." She'd taken that warning to heart. Until tonight. Until she stood there shaking, menus clutched against her chest, knowing 2 men in the back hallway had just planned Luca Romano's murder like it was a grocery list. Make it look like a robbery. Drop anyone who gets in the way. Her stomach twisted. Her skin prickled with cold dread. Any rational person would walk out the front door, call in sick, pretend nothing happened. Self-preservation wasn't cowardice. It was smart. It was necessary. Especially when the target was a man like Luca. Especially when the killers didn't mind adding extra bodies to the floor. But across the room, Luca sat in his usual corner, coat removed, sleeves rolled, posture a blend of confidence and quiet fatigue. He looked like someone who had chosen this restaurant as his one sanctuary from the chaos of the world outside. A place where he could breathe, rest, pretend, for an hour, that the weight of whatever empire he carried didn't crush him. He didn't look like a man expecting an ambush. He didn't look like a man who knew death was already in the building. Mia's pulse hammered so hard it blurred her vision. She should walk away. She should mind her business. She should let fate, karma, whoever handle it. Because Luca Romano wasn't just a regular customer. He was power. He was danger. He was whispered about with the kind of fear that made grown men lower their voices. But he was also the man who once stepped between her and a drunken customer who had grabbed her arm too hard. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply placed 2 fingers on the man's wrist, applied the slightest pressure, and said in a voice soft as velvet, "I don't think she wants you touching her." The customer left without paying and never came back. And Luca didn't tell anyone what he'd done. He never made her feel small, never took advantage, never crossed lines. He just protected her. Silently, casually, as if it were second nature. So now she stood here, trembling but unable to turn her back on him. She tried to force herself to stay put, to let the world handle its own darkness. She told herself 100 things. He's dangerous. You barely know him. You're a waitress, not a hero. He wouldn't risk his life for you. But then he lifted his glass of wine, his gaze drifting toward the window with an expression she had never seen on him before. Unguarded, solitary, strangely human. Like a man too tired to notice a storm rushing in behind him. And Mia broke. Her feet moved before her brain could catch up, pushing her through the maze of tables toward his corner. Her hands were shaking so badly she hid them behind her apron, hoping no one noticed. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it wanted to burst free. She kept her head down at first, as if she could pretend this was just another refill or another quick check-in. But halfway there, Luca lifted his gaze, and the moment his dark eyes met hers, the world tilted. He straightened almost imperceptibly. Something in his posture changed, sharpening with awareness, like he sensed something was wrong just from the way she approached. "Mia," he greeted softly, voice dipping just enough to curl around her name. "Everything all right?" She swallowed hard. No, nothing was all right. The air behind her felt wired with danger. A shadow moved near the back hallway. One of the men, she was sure of it. They were getting ready, moving into position. She had seconds. Her throat tightened. "Can we talk?" she whispered. In all the months she'd served him, she'd never sounded like this. Luca's expression shifted instantly, gentle concern hardening into something sharper, focused, alert. "Of course," he murmured, gaze sweeping the room in a single controlled scan. She stepped closer, close enough that his cologne, warm, subtle, expensive, wrapped around her like a warning she was too late to heed. "Please," she whispered, heart thundering. Don't move. Not yet, just listen." Every survival instinct screamed she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Every memory of his quiet kindness told her she had no choice. Sometimes survival wasn't about keeping your head down. Sometimes survival meant saving someone who had once saved you. So Mia took a breath she didn't have and said the words that would change everything. "Someone here tonight. They're planning to kill you." Mia's hands trembled so hard she nearly dropped the plates she'd grabbed as camouflage. She set them down on Luca's table with a quiet clatter, bowing her head to hide the panic tightening her face. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her throat felt too tight to breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear, to pretend she hadn't heard a thing. But she couldn't. Not when he was sitting there, calm, unsuspecting, about to be ambushed. She leaned in just enough that her hair shielded her mouth from the room. "Don't turn around," she whispered, her voice barely more than a shaky exhale. "They're here for you. 2 men in the back hallway. They're going to kill you." For a heartbeat, one suspended, terrifying moment, Luca didn't react. He didn't look up, didn't tense, didn't blink. He just went still. Still in a way that was wrong. Inhuman even. Like the entire world had paused around him while something inside him recalibrated. Then, slowly, too slowly, his eyes lifted to hers. The warmth she'd come to know in his gaze vanished completely. In its place was something cold, sharp, lethal. The kind of calm that only someone who had walked through hell and learned to map its terrain could wear like a second skin. He spoke without moving his lips, matching her whisper with one of his own. "Mia, listen to me carefully." She nodded, throat tight. "You are going to turn around," he murmured, his voice controlled to an eerie precision. "Walk away from this table, and you are going to forget everything you just told me." Her heart lurched. "No!" His jaw flexed. "Mia, I'm not leaving you," she insisted, the words cracking. "I'm not letting you sit here and just wait for someone to shoot you." "You don't understand," he said, so quietly no one else could have heard. "If they see you with me, if they think you're involved, you won't walk out of this place alive." "I don't care," she whispered fiercely. His eyes blazed, anger flashing for the first time. Not at her, she knew that instinctively, but at the danger she had willingly stepped into. You should care, he said. This isn't your fight. It is now. She didn't know where the courage came from, or the recklessness. All she knew was her hands were still shaking, her breath unsteady, but she was rooted to the floor. She'd watched him notice her exhaustion with more care than most people gave loved ones. She'd watched him stop a man from hurting her without ever making her feel small. She'd watched him tip generously, not to impress her, but because he genuinely saw her. And she couldn't let him die. Luca's fingers tightened around the stem of his wineglass, not in fear, but in calculation, in deadly, silent strategy. Tell me exactly what you heard. Her voice trembled as she repeated the men's words, every detail burning in her mind. Make it look like a robbery, and if anyone gets in the way, drop them too. As she finished, Luca exhaled once, slow, steady, controlled, not afraid, already planning. He leaned back in his seat, posture relaxed enough that an untrained eye might think he was simply enjoying dinner. But Mia could see it now, how his shoulders had shifted, how his eyes tracked movement with new intensity. Where are they now? He asked. In the back hallway, she whispered. But one of them heard me. I think they're looking for whoever was listening. His gaze sharpened like a blade. You should have run. Would you have? She shot back. For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not humor, not annoyance, recognition. No, he admitted, voice low. I wouldn't have. She swallowed hard. Then don't ask me to. A muscle in his jaw ticked. He was furious, fighting not to show it. Fighting the urge to drag her out of the restaurant himself. Mia, he said, voice dangerously soft. If anything happens to you, it won't. She forced her voice steady. Not if we move now. He stared at her, not just looking, studying, assessing, weighing her words, weighing her courage, weighing her life against his decisions. A shadow passed behind her. One of the men. Her heart lurched. Luca's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. Don't react, don't turn. She felt her breath hitch, fear gripping her lungs like a fist. They're watching, he murmured, his face calm, expression unreadable. So I need you to walk away, tesoro. Now. No, she whispered back, voice trembling but resolute. I'm not letting you die in front of me. His eyes darkened, not with anger, but something deeper, something dangerous, something protective. You won't, he said. I promise you. Then what do we do? She breathed. He slowly pushed back his chair. What he said next wasn't a whisper, wasn't gentle. It was a command. Stay behind me. And as he rose, every shadow in the room seemed to tighten, every light dim, every sound hush, because Luca Romano was done pretending he didn't know death was coming. The air in the restaurant shifted, subtly at first like a cold draft no one else noticed. But Mia felt it. Every instinct she possessed screamed that something was moving, something was coming. Her skin prickled. Her breath stuttered. Her pulse thundered so violently she thought it might shake her apart. No. Luca rose from his chair as if he had all the time in the world, the picture of unbothered elegance. But Mia saw it now, the tension beneath his stillness, the coil of violence waiting under the surface, the razor-sharp awareness in his eyes as they flicked toward the shadows behind her. Don't turn around, he murmured. Just breathe. She didn't have time. She didn't have breath. She felt it. Them. One man approaching from behind Luca, steps too soft, too measured. Another to his right, angling in, hand slipping beneath his jacket. And then she saw it. The glint of cold metal. A gun. Already raised, already aimed directly at Luca Romano's heart. Time didn't just slow, it fractured. Every sound stretched thin. The clattering of a fork, the hum of the air conditioner, the soft jazz humming through the speakers. Everything became distant, distorted, like she was hearing it underwater. But the gun? The gun was crystal clear. It lifted, the muzzle locking onto Luca's chest with deadly intent. And Luca, calm, focused, prepared, started to move, his posture shifting as his hand dipped subtly toward his jacket. But it wouldn't be fast enough. Mia knew it with a sickening certainty. They were going to shoot him before he even drew his weapon. A scream built in her chest, but never reached her lips. Logic told her to freeze, to hide, to run, to do anything except what she did next. She moved, without thinking, without planning, without giving fear a chance to drag her back. Her feet lunged forward, her body acting on some reckless, impossible instinct. She shoved herself between Luca and the man with the gun, planting her small frame directly in the line of fire. The muzzle swung up, adjusting to her instead. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her hands shot up, palms out, trembling violently. "Stop!" Her voice cracked through the restaurant like a breaking glass. The man with the gun froze. The other diners froze. The servers froze. Even the music seemed to stop. And Luca. Luca made a sound she'd never heard from him before. Not anger, not shock. Something darker. Something primal. A single word shaped in his throat, barely audible, but heavy enough to shake the air. "Mia!" If fear were a living thing, it wrapped itself around her spine, squeezing until she could barely breathe. The barrel of the gun was now inches from her chest, close enough that she saw her reflection in the cold steel, close enough to smell the oil on the weapon. Her knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself to stand firm. The hitman's eyes widened behind the weapon, stunned not by her bravery, but by her stupidity. What the hell are you doing?" he growled under his breath. Mia's voice came out trembling, but loud enough to carry. "You shoot him. You shoot me first." The man's jaw slackened, thrown off his script. This wasn't supposed to happen. Waitresses weren't supposed to intervene. Women weren't supposed to step into the line of fire for men like Luca. Luca wasn't breathing. He stood frozen not in fear, but in a rage so quiet it was terrifying. His posture lethal, his eyes locked on Mia's back like she was the only thing anchoring him to this earth. "Mia," he said again, voice low, dangerous. "Move." She shook her head even though he couldn't see her face. "No." A tremor quaked through her entire body. She had never been so terrified. Her hands shook so hard she thought they might fall off. Every instinct screamed run, but her feet stayed rooted. "If you want him," she said, voice cracking but clear, "you'll have to go through me." The hitman scowled. "Lady, don't make me." "You point that gun at her," a voice behind her cut in, low and lethal, "and I'll put you in the ground before you blink." The entire restaurant seemed to bow under the weight of it. Luca had stepped forward, not recklessly, not angrily, with purpose, with deadly promise. The man behind her shifted, tightening his grip on his weapon, but Luca didn't flinch. His hand hovered near his jacket, poised to draw, his jaw flexed in a silent warning. And then he said it. Soft, deadly, final. "Touch her, and you die." The words didn't need volume. They carried all the force in the world. The hitman hesitated, just for a fraction of a breath. But for Luca, a fraction was enough. The hitman's lip curled, the sneer slow and vicious, like he was savoring the sight of Mia trembling in front of him. The barrel of the gun pressed closer to her chest, so close she felt the cold metal kiss through her shirt. Her breath caught, her heartbeat stuttered. She could practically taste the gunpowder in the air. "Move," the man hissed, his voice a razor-blade whisper, "or you're the one who dies tonight." Her legs nearly buckled. Fear surged hot and suffocating up her throat, threatening to swallow her whole. For a split second, one brief, horrifying second, she thought she might faint. Then Luca stood. His chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound that cut sharper than the gunman's words. Slow, deliberate, final. A sound that made the entire restaurant flinch as though someone had drawn a blade across the room. The temperature dropped. Not physically, something deeper, The atmosphere thickened around him, vibrating with a tension that prickled across Mia's skin even with her back turned to him. Luca Romano didn't shout. He didn't have to. His presence alone shifted the air, pulling it taut like a stretched wire. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but deadly. Touch, a step forward. Her, another step. And you die. The final word landed like a hammer blow, so heavy the gunman actually jolted. So cold Mia felt it in her bones. Silence swallowed the restaurant. Then, everything exploded into motion. From the corner of her eye, Mia saw a man rise from a nearby table, pulling a weapon from beneath his jacket. She recognized him. Someone she'd served water to earlier. A quiet man who'd tipped politely and kept to himself. Another man stood near the bar, hand going to his waistband. A woman, someone she thought was just another diner, pulled back her coat to reveal the unmistakable grip of a pistol. They all aimed at the hitmen. Not at Mia, not at Luca. At the threat. Luca hadn't come in alone. He had filled the restaurant with his people, hidden in plain sight, scattered like shadows among the evening crowd. For hours they'd eaten pasta, clinked wine glasses, chatted softly, waiting, and now their guns were drawn. A half dozen in total, maybe more. Mia couldn't turn fully around to count. Her breath froze as one of the men by the windows spoke into an earpiece. Targets identified. On your word, boss. Boss. The realization slammed into her like a blow. The whispers had always followed Luca. Dangerous, powerful, feared. But she'd never let herself believe he was that Luca Romano, the kind of man who could choke the air from a room just by standing. But tonight, there was no pretending. She felt his eyes on her back, burning with fury, yes, but also something else. Something far more terrifying in its intensity. Something protective and personal. Luca took another step toward her, the floorboards groaning beneath his slow, controlled stride. Mia. His voice softened just a fraction, shaped with a warning he rarely gave anyone. Move away from him. She shook her head, unable to speak, unable to breathe, unable to do anything except cling to the last shred of courage she had left. The gunman laughed, a shaky, brittle sound. You think I care who you are? He spat, voice cracking. I'll shoot her, then shoot you, and walk out before anyone even... He didn't finish. A red laser dot slid across the gunman's forehead, another across his chest, a third onto his trigger finger. Luca's men had him locked from every angle. The second hitman, the one behind Luca, froze with his fingers hovering above his hidden weapon as two more red dots painted circles across his body. The room had become a pressure cooker, a silent war zone disguised as a restaurant. Drop the gun, Luca said. He didn't raise his voice, didn't bark, didn't threaten. It was simply an instruction, a promise of what would happen if it wasn't obeyed. Now. The barrel shaking inches from Mia's chest trembled sideways. Boss, one of Luca's men murmured. Give the order. But Luca's gaze stayed on Mia. Only her. Step toward me, he said, low, lethal, hypnotic. Right now. Her entire body trembled, adrenaline roaring through her. But she stepped backward, inch by inch, until she felt Luca's hand close around her arm, steadying her, anchoring her, pulling her behind him with a gentleness that nearly made her collapse. Once she was safely shielded behind his back, Luca lifted his chin. His jaw hardened, his eyes turned to ice, and then, finally, he gave the order. Take them. Chaos erupted the moment Luca spoke. Not loud, not wild, precise. Violence executed with the terrifying efficiency of men who were trained to end lives before a scream could form. The hitman closest to Mia didn't even have time to twitch. 1 second the gun was leveled at her chest. The next, Luca's hand shot out with inhuman speed. His fingers clamped around the man's wrist, twisting sharply. A sickening crack split the air as the weapon clattered to the floor. The sound jolted through Mia's bones. Before the hitman's cry even left his throat, Luca slammed an elbow into his jaw. The man dropped like a lifeless weight, crumpling at her feet. Gasps rippled through the restaurant. Luca didn't pause. He pivoted, coat flaring behind him. Just as the second hitman lunged from the left, the man didn't get a single proper step in. Luca met him halfway, catching him by the collar and slamming him against the wall so hard the framed photographs rattled. The man's gun clattered uselessly as Luca's forearm pressed across his throat.
"You thought you'd walk into my place,"
Luca growled, low enough that only the hitman and Mia heard it.
"And leave alive?"
It wasn't the voice Mia knew. This wasn't the quiet man who tipped generously and noticed her exhaustion. This wasn't the man who sipped his wine slowly and asked if she got home safe. This voice was something older, darker, sharpened by a lifetime of power. This was the whispered-about monster, the shadow in the alleys, the man parents threatened their sons with, the force that built an empire out of fear and iron, and he was standing inches from her. Yet even as he disarmed one man and incapacitated the other, Luca's arm stayed firmly in front of her, a barrier, a shield, a silent vow. She didn't need to see his face to know his focus was split, one part calculating the threat, the other ensuring she remained untouched. A hitman clawed for the fallen gun. Luca's reaction was instantaneous. He kicked it away, the metal skidding across the tile before one of his own men scooped it up. Another of Luca's men forced the would-be shooter to the ground. "Secure them," Luca barked. The authority in his voice sent chills racing down Mia's spine. No hesitation, no fear, no mercy. She finally understood why her co-workers whispered when he walked in, why her manager had warned her, why half the city avoided his gaze. Because when Luca Romano acted, the world reshaped itself around him. His men moved like an extension of his will, flooding the room with weapons drawn. They subdued both hitmen, zip-tying their wrists, gagging them with brutal ease. One man murmured into an earpiece,
"Clean up inbound. 5 minutes."
Mia stood frozen, breath trembling, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the chaos. She should have been terrified of him. And she was. But she was also struck by something else. Something she didn't have words for yet. Because as bodies hit the floor and armed men filled the restaurant, as danger pulsed in the air like electricity, Luca kept his arm in front of her, shielding, guarding, holding her back with the gentleness of a man afraid to bruise a butterfly. "Mia," he said suddenly, turning his head slightly, voice still edged with command. "Are you hurt?" She stared at him, unable to speak. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. He didn't wait for her answer. His attention snapped to his men. "Get her out of here," he ordered. Not shouted, just ordered. A tone that brooked no argument. "Now!" A guard stepped forward to escort her. Mia instinctively reached for Luca's coat sleeve. "Wait!" His gaze pinned her in place. Dark, intense, still laced with the fury of moments ago, but softened, barely, when it landed on her face. "You shouldn't have stepped in front of that gun." "I wasn't going to let them kill you," she whispered. Something violent flickered across his expression. Not anger, not relief, but something deeper, something dangerous. "They were going to kill you," he said. "Do you understand that? You put yourself between me and a bullet. You—" His voice broke off, strangled by emotion he refused to show in public. A crack appeared in the armor, brief but unmistakable. And then, just as quickly, it sealed. He stepped back, jaw tight. "Take her," he repeated, voice firm again. "Don't let her out of your sight." A guard gently touched her elbow, urging her toward the back exit. As she was led away, she looked over her shoulder. Luca stood in the center of the destroyed calm, surrounded by his men, the subdued hitmen, the overturned chairs, a king in the middle of a battlefield, a monster the city feared. And yet, he watched only her. The ride to the safe house blurred by in a haze of adrenaline and disbelief. Mia barely registered the black SUV's tinted windows, or the way Luca's men surrounded the vehicle like a moving fortress. She sat sandwiched between two of them in the back seat, her hands still shaking, her heartbeat still trapped in the frantic rhythm of the restaurant. She'd never seen anyone die. She'd never seen anyone almost die. And tonight, she'd almost been both. Her mind replayed it again and again. The gun, Luca's voice, the hitmen, the coldness in his eyes when he'd fought. But underneath all of it, there was something else tangled in her thoughts. Luca's arm in front of her, shielding her. His voice gentling every time it reached her name. The way he'd looked at her, furious and terrified and alive. By the time they reached the safe house, a hidden brownstone tucked between abandoned warehouses, Mia's legs were so unsteady that one of the guards had to steady her as she stepped out. Inside, the place was unexpectedly warm. Soft lighting, leather sofas, a stocked kitchen. It felt less like a hideout and more like someone's expensive, rarely used apartment. Luca arrived moments later, flanked by two men who disappeared as soon as he gave a curt nod. He was still in the same clothes, jacket splattered from the scuffle, shirt rumpled from the fight, but his presence filled the room, overwhelming the silence. Mia stood near the far wall, arms wrapped tightly around her body, unsure if she wanted to scream, cry, or collapse. Luca took a few steps toward her, then paused, as if unsure how close she'd let him come. "You're safe here," he said quietly. She let out a shaky breath that almost became a laugh. "Safe? Luca, someone pointed a gun at my chest." Her voice cracked. 2 hours ago I was serving lasagna. Now I'm here. He exhaled slowly. "I know." "No, you don't." Her eyes lifted to his, wide, overwhelmed. "You do this. You live this. But I didn't sign up." Luca closed the distance between them with 2 steps, stopping just a foot from her. "You're here," he said softly, "because you put yourself between me and a bullet." She swallowed hard. "I didn't think. I just reacted." "That's the problem." His voice darkened with frustration, and something deeper, something raw. "They saw you. They saw you step in front of me. They know your face, your voice. They'll find your name by morning." Her stomach dropped. My name?" He nodded once, jaw tight. "By interfering, you marked yourself, and they will come for you to get to me." Her breath hitched. "So what do I do now? Run? Hide? Pretend this never happened?" "You can't go back," Luca said. No hesitation, no apology, just truth. "Your life as you knew it is over." The words struck her like a blow. She stared at him, stunned. "You're telling me I've lost everything? My job? My apartment? My normal?" "Yes." The single word was a blade, but then his voice softened. "But you won't be alone." A chill slid down her spine. "Meaning?" Luca stepped closer, close enough that she felt his breath against her cheek. His eyes were impossibly dark, impossibly sincere. "I'm offering you protection. Under my name." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "Protection? Luca, I'm just a waitress," he finished for her, raising a brow. "You think that matters to me?" Her throat tightened. "Why? Why risk so much for someone you barely know?" Luca's gaze locked onto hers with a weight she wasn't prepared for. "I know you more than you think," her breath caught. He reached up, gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek with a tenderness that didn't belong to the man she'd seen fight like a monster an hour ago. "I noticed you long before you ever looked at me," he admitted quietly. "The first time you served me at Riva's, you apologized 3 times for a spill that wasn't your fault. The second time, you hid a bruise on your wrist from a customer who didn't know how to keep his hands to himself. The third time," his voice dipped lower, "you smiled at me. Not out of fear, not because you wanted anything. You just smiled." Her heart thudded painfully. "You think I didn't see you?" he murmured. "Tesoro, I saw everything." Mia felt her knees weaken, a rush of warmth flooding through her chest despite the terror still curling in her stomach. "But why protect me like this?" "Because you risked your life for mine," he said simply. "And in my world, that makes you mine to protect." She didn't know what scared her more, that her old life was gone, or that a part of her wasn't sure she wanted it back. ChatGPT Zay. The world didn't go back to normal. It rearranged itself around her. In the weeks that followed the restaurant attack, Mia lived inside a quiet storm, a life split cleanly in two. There was the old life: tips, double shifts, rent notices, textbooks. And then the new one: guards who followed her like shadows, burner phones she didn't understand how to use, and Luca Romano appearing in doorways like a pull of gravity she couldn't fight. Word spread faster than she ever imagined. She didn't see it happen, but she felt it. The city changed around her. Streets that once pulsed with noise now parted in wary silence. Strangers glanced at her, then quickly looked away. Men who would have whistled or flirted before now stepped off the sidewalk to give her space, because everyone had heard the same thing. She stepped in front of the gun. Luca Romano claimed her. Hurt her and you bleed. She wished she could pretend it wasn't real, but the fear in people's eyes didn't lie. Neither did the constant presence of Luca's men, silent, watchful, never more than a doorway or a car length away. Mia didn't ask for protection. She didn't want to be the reason people whispered in fear. And yet, some nights, when she woke, shaking from nightmares of the barrel aimed at her heart, she was grateful for the figure she'd see in the hallway, one of Luca's men stationed outside her door, head bowed in silent vigilance. Eventually, almost reluctantly, she decided to return to work. The restaurant felt smaller when she walked in, as if the walls themselves recognized what had happened inside them. Conversations stopped when the staff saw her. Aaron hugged her too tightly. Mario crossed himself, and the manager nearly dropped his clipboard. "You sure about this?" he whispered. No, not even a little, but she nodded anyway. She needed something normal to hold on to. The first few hours passed in a strange, skittering quiet. Customers watched her the way people watch lightning. Beautiful, dangerous, unpredictable. Some offered nervous smiles. Most avoided her entirely. But the worst part wasn't the fear. It was the shadows. She could feel them. Luca's men, stationed at the bar, at the exit, in a booth pretending to read newspapers. Their eyes tracked every movement in the room, every person who came within 2 steps of her. She knew they wouldn't intervene unless absolutely necessary, but even unseen, their presence hummed against her skin like static. By the end of her shift, she was exhausted from pretending she didn't notice them. Then a man she'd never seen before walked in. Not one of Luca's men. Not a regular. A stranger with a too long gaze and a too confident smile. He chose a table in Mia's section. She tried to ignore the prickling sensation at the back of her neck as she approached with a polite smile and her notepad. "What can I get you?" she asked. His eyes drifted slow, too slow, down her frame before returning to her face. "You," he said. Her breath caught. Her stomach clenched. She stepped back, instinctively angling toward the open space of the dining room. He reached out, too fast, and wrapped his fingers around her wrist. The entire restaurant stilled. A chair scraped somewhere behind her, the sound abrupt and sharp enough to make the stranger flinch. Mia turned just as a shadow detached itself from the back of the room. Luca. He didn't storm in. He didn't shout. He just appeared, as if he'd stepped out of the air itself. His coat swayed with each step, his expression carved in ice. Every man stationed in the restaurant straightened, hands drifting toward concealed holsters. The stranger dropped Mia's wrist immediately, stumbling back as if burned. Luca didn't look at him. Not yet. His eyes were on her. Only her. "You're bleeding," he murmured, noticing the red mark on her wrist where the man had grabbed her. His voice softened to something dangerously tender. "Who touched you?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. Luca didn't need them. He turned, slowly, deliberately, to face the stranger. One look. Just one. And the temperature in the room plummeted. The man's bravado dissolved instantly, terror hollowing out his expression. He tried to speak, to explain, to lie, but nothing came out except a panicked wheeze. Luca stepped closer, invading his space with a quiet, suffocating dominance that made every person in the restaurant shrink back.
You put your hands on her,
he said, voice low enough to shake the floor.
Do you have any idea what that means?
No, I didn't. Luca leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. I will burn this city to its foundations before I let anyone hurt her. The man collapsed into his chair, shaking so violently the utensils rattled. Luca straightened, his jaw tight, his eyes glacial.
Get out!
The man ran so fast he left his jacket behind. Mia stood frozen, breath trembling, heart pounding in her ears. Luca turned back to her, the violence slipping from his face, replaced by a tenderness that shook her more than the threat had.
Come here,
he said softly. She did, without thinking. His hand brushed her cheek, gentle where he'd been ruthless seconds before.
You're safe,
he murmured.
As long as I breathe, you're safe.
A line had been drawn that night, cold, sharp, irreversible. A line written not in ink, but in blood. And Mia knew the city would never dare cross it.